Welcome back to The Explainer, everyone. Today, we're diving into a corporate survival story that is honestly just staggering. Picture this, a company that kicked things off as a gritty Victorian ironworks, literally forging metal way back in the 1700s, and somehow, against all odds, managed to completely transform itself into a modern pioneer of electric vehicle technology. I mean, how exactly does a company survive 2.5 centuries of industrial revolutions, market crashes, and intense boardroom battles? Well, today, we're going to trace that exact evolution. Okay, let's dive into this agenda and see exactly where we're going. We'll kick things off with a hostile takeover survives, before jumping back in time to their origins, from nuts to ironworks. From there, we'll track their pivot, entering the automotive age, see how they're powering the EV revolution, and finally wrap things up with a look at the Dowlais Group today. All right, part one, a hostile takeover survives. To really wrap our heads around this company's incredible resilience, we've got to rewind just a bit to 2018. The company is GKN, a 259-year-old British engineering empire at this point, and they suddenly find themselves staring down the barrel of an intense £8 billion hostile takeover bid by Melrose Industries. So what actually happens when a historic 2.5-century-old giant is suddenly on the chopping block? Do they just get dismantled and sold off for parts? The drama at the time was off the charts. We're talking parliamentary hearings, serious national security concerns, frantic attempts to spin off divisions, the whole shebang. But ultimately, Melrose narrowly won the battle. And this brilliantly illustrates the massive gap that often exists between media panic and actual corporate reality. If you look at the fears from 2018, critics were sounding the alarm about quote-unquote asset-stripping financial engineers just coming in and wrecking the company. But contrasting that with the reality of what actually went down, it was really just a tale of hard grind and steady improvement. In fact, when the pandemic hit and turned the global economy upside down, Melrose's relentless focus on cash management was exactly the life raft the company needed to survive the massive COVID cash crunch. Moving right along to part two, from nuts to ironworks. So what exactly was this massive, sprawling legacy they were fighting so hard to protect in 2018? Well, let me walk you through the timeline of a guy named Arthur Keene. Born in 1835, Keene started out with a pretty meager education, working as a railway clerk. But the guy was an absolute master networker. By 1858, his job had hooked him up with some serious industrial contacts, and he married the daughter of an industrialist, which, secured him the capital he needed. Fast forward to 1864, he launches a limited company making patent nuts and bolts. But Keene didn't just stop at small hardware. Through some incredibly astute acquisitions, he expanded aggressively, like really aggressively. In 1899, he outright bought the massive Dowlais Iron Company for £1.5 million. Finally, in 1902, he merges with a neighboring business, and boom, Guest, Keene, and Nettlefold, or GKN, is officially born. So the absolutely crucial point here is that Keene's 19th century objective wasn't just to make a decent product. It was to completely dominate the market through economies of scale and aggressive pricing. He built this massively profitable business through really careful alliances and strict price maintenance. And you know what? This foundational DNA, this culture of ruthless efficiency and scale, that is exactly what gave GKN the thick skin needed to survive literally centuries of global market shifts. All right, on to part three, entering the automotive age. Now, obviously, iron and simple fasteners weren't going to sustain an empire forever, right? As the industrial landscape started shifting in the 20th century, GKN took their deep expertise in forging metal and used it to become an absolutely vital supplier to the booming UK auto industry throughout the 1950s and 60s. Now, they weren't building the whole car. Instead, they were building the essential, highly stressed components that actually made the car move. We're talking crankshafts, connecting rods, half shafts, and eventually they became massive manufacturers of constant velocity joints, or CVJs. If you know cars, you know these are the critical joints that let power transfer from the engine to the wheels smoothly, even while the wheels are steering and bouncing over rough roads. Basically, they went from making the bolts that hold things together to mastering the mechanical transfer of power itself. Let's move to part four and see how this builds into the modern day, powering the EV revolution. So how exactly does a mechanical parts manufacturer build a bridge into the ultra-high-tech era? Well, to understand their EV technology, you really have to understand the core concept of torque management. And why does this matter to you as a driver? Because it is literally the secret sauce that makes your car grip the road and handle safely. It's all about traction to propel the vehicle without slipping, stability to correct understeer or oversteer, and agility to give you that tight, ultra-responsive cornering experience. GKN essentially took all this deep, hard-earned mechanical expertise in managing torque and directly applied it to torque generation in the electric age. And let me tell you, they haven't just been dabbling in this space. 2.5 million. That is the staggering number of electric drive systems GKN Automotive has supplied to date. They aren't just sitting around waiting for the EV revolution to happen, they're quietly powering it from behind the scenes, designing their very own traction motors, inverters, and software completely in-house. Now, what's really interesting about this is the sheer performance capability they've managed to unlock, specifically with their torque vectoring twinster eDrive system. Just look at these specs for a second. It generates 120 kilowatts of system power and a massive 3,500 newton meters of output torque. That is enough to push vehicles up to 250 kilometers per hour. But it's not just about raw straight-line power. It's all about control. Instead of your standard open differential, this system uses twin clutches paired with an electric motor to independently control the torque sent to each specific wheel. So if you're cornering hard, it actively vectors power to the outside wheel to physically push you through the turn. It is high-end agility driven entirely by electric power. But beyond just high performance, they've also mastered efficiency for everyday compact EVs by using a highly modular approach. They offer a single-speed coaxial eDrive system that is incredibly small, weighing it at only 76 kilograms, yet it still punches out 90 kilowatts of power. It even features this unique electronic disconnect differential, which completely decouples the motor at high speeds to save energy. But here is the truly brilliant part for automakers. GKN uses common control boards across both their 400-volt and 800-volt inverters. Think of these as highly advanced, reusable building blocks. This modular architecture allows car manufacturers to stay agile, adapt quickly, and get their electric vehicles to market so much faster without having to completely reinvent the wheel every single time. Which brings us to our final section, the Dowlais Group today. So, we've traveled all the way from a 19th century ironworks to cutting-edge EV inverters. Let's bring this narrative arc full circle. In April 2023, Melrose Industries finally demerged the automotive and powder metallurgy divisions into a brand new, completely independent company listed on the London Stock Exchange, and they named it the Dowlais Group. Honestly, this is such a wonderfully poetic naming choice. It directly honors the Dowlais Ironworks, the very same Welsh facility that Arthur Keane acquired way back in 1899, and the exact spot where GKN first licensed the revolutionary Bessemer steel process in 1865. So they effectively took this ultra-modern EV tech company and wrapped it right back up in the identity of its gritty 19th century origins. But, of course, the corporate saga had one final twist. Just a few short years after that demerger, in February 2026, the newly minted Dowlais Group was acquired for $1.4 billion. The buyer? American Axle, a major automotive supplier that recently rebranded as the Dodge Corporation. So the legacy changes hands yet again, proving that in the totally ruthless global automotive market, adaptation and consolidation literally never sleep. Which brings us to our final thought. We've watched this entity survive a massive hostile takeover, pivot from making basic patent nuts and bolts to forging vital mechanical joints, and then successfully leap right into software-driven torque-vectoring electric motors. It really is an incredible masterclass in survival through adaptation. So, as they kick off this brand new chapter under the Dodge Corporation, I want to leave you with this. From an 18th century ironworks to a 21st century EV pioneer, what do you think the next century of evolution looks like for this historic lineage? Keep a close eye on this tech space, folks, because if history tells us anything, it's that they are far from done. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep learning.